I had a Mr. Dillon, or Dr. Dillon, as my high school humanities teacher, Robert Dillon. And he was actually at the, it's pretty remarkable, and this is what I always feel like when I'm at a New York audience. It's pretty remarkable to be the union president of your own mother's union, or the union president of people that you had and loved and beloved as teachers. And so as Dr. Dillon was introducing me, I was thinking about the other Dr. Dillon, who actually came to the convention in which I was inaugurated as president of the AFT. I say that and I start that way because in some ways, that's kind of the best of education, in that you remember, and I'm really glad that that Dr. Botstein kind of ended with a sense of gratitude to all of you. Because we don't express gratitude enough for the work that all of us do. But I start with where Leon ended, because probably the most important thing I can say, other than saying thank you, Jolene DeBrango, for letting me actually do this and speak for myself as opposed to speaking directly for NYSIT or for the AFT, is that we work in a moment that's really different than even 2 or 3 years ago. The context of how we work, that must be thought about and understood. It's not the high school experience that I went to, in Clarkstown High School North, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. Even though I would actually say that any student in high school thought about college or career readiness. Not just me, but everyone in this room and so many others who we teach. But we are in a different moment, and I'm really glad that Leon put that at us. We're in a different moment about democracy, and we're in a different moment about safe and welcoming environments. 45% of the students in the United States of America have faced some kind of trauma. Half the students who go to public schools start as, quote, poor. Not poor students, but because they are under the poverty line. And I can go on in terms of other statistics. So as a result, all of us are kind of first responders to everything that's going on in society right now. And what happened in the period of time of No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top is as if none of that was real. So we were doing all of this on the side, but the accountability system was simply really about reading, writing, and mathematics. And frankly, that had to be as crazy-making for everybody in this room as it was or for our 1.7 million members. And so the first thing that I actually really want to say is that the opportunity that the regions are giving us, and look, I'm a New Yorker. I may work all across the country, but I am a New Yorker. So this is a real opportunity for all of us in a really, really tough Dickinsonian time. And I see this kind of like a Flexner-like opportunity. Al Schenker used to talk about the Flexner Commission a lot. For those who don't know what it was how medical schools fundamentally changed themselves to be about how you do the clinical work and the clinical practice. so that when somebody actually got out of a residency, they kind of sort of knew what they were doing in medicine. And it fundamentally changed. It was one of those few kind of blue ribbon commissions that kind of worked. I know kinda is not a word that English teachers use, but I am a social studies teacher, so forgive me my slang. But this may be that kind of moment to actually kind of fundamentally rethink a bunch of things in terms of high school graduation rates and career or college readiness. So this is how I think. I don't think in the language of pedagogies. I think about storytelling. So when Roger and I have been talking about these issues probably for 20 years, I probably have thought about college readiness, not from the eyes of a student, but from the eyes of a teacher ever since I taught at Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn in the 1990s. But this is what I think about the reimagination. Urban Academy, which is in the Julia Richmond complex. Urban Academy students present their capstone projects to a panel of their own teachers and other school and external evaluators. I was really lucky to be able to spend 2 hours without a cell phone, without an iPhone. I don't know if there were iPhones, I think I had a BlackBerry at that moment, to serve as part of the external panel for students who were defending what looked like a thesis and a doctoral dissertation on Brown versus Board of Education and its progeny, and what worked and what didn't work, and how the rejection of the fallacy of separate but equal was really important on paper, but did it really work, and what do you need to do to make that work? And this was about 10 years ago, and I still remember it today in a way that I could describe it. No speechwriter wrote those words for me because they weren't there. It was I who was there, and I remembered those kids and how they could answer questions and their composure and how they could communicate and what that kind of education meant that led to that. And you heard what Leon said about the difference between how you can see between right or wrong or distill whatever it is on the left or the right in terms of what's going on today. The second is Toledo Technical Academy, because these days I can't be completely New York centric. Toledo Technical Academy is in Ohio. High school students are offered a chance to develop their STEM skills with local businesses. I love calling it STEAM instead of STEM these days for all the reasons all of you would. But they have a program directly, in some ways like P-Tech, but with that little outfit called General Motors. And the director of manufacturing at GM said of Toledo Tech students that they do as well as interns that GM brings in from places like Purdue and University of Michigan. A whole different kind of way of doing performance-based instruction and that kind of pathway. And the third story that I want you to try to visualize is the students in my own AP Gov courses that I taught at Clara Barton. Yes, a career tech ed school in New York City was teaching AP courses in the 1990s. But it was particularly the preparations we did on the We the People debate competition. And we'd spend hours with our school and our teams working, deciding their best arguments, practicing and polishing. And frankly, I saw a level of mastery of my kids that was deeper than anything I saw of kids who took the social studies regents. not suggesting we get rid of all the regents. I am suggesting that that level of mastery was profound. And indeed, there is a recent study that, and those of you who have heard me speak have heard me say this before, that scholars Joel Mehta and Sarah Fine have concluded after studying high schools for 6 years, and they found that powerful learning was happening most often in electives, clubs, and after-school or extracurricular activities. And the question is always, why does that not count? If that is where the kind of lessons, the kind of skill building that kids need to know and be able to do, why are we not counting that? And that is the opportunity that I think you all have in New York right now, and that is the purpose in some ways of this kind of reimagination, and why Roger or Regent Tillis brought us together. So what do we do? How do we think about it? How do we end one size fits all without throwing out all of the regents? Because frankly, the regents nationally are some of the most important, enduring kind of end of year, end of term, end of graduation tests that I have seen nationally. So I'm not making a pitch to end the regents. I am making a pitch to come up with multiple pathways. Because I think if we come up with multiple pathways, we'll be able to answer the questions of not only what do we want our children to know and be able to do, but how can they demonstrate it? And what are the measures of that kind of demonstration? And what are the measures of the demonstration of mastery? So, I think that Leon talked a lot about the first question, about what do we want our children to know and be able to do by the time they graduate. And I do agree, like Leon has said, that public schools are foundational to democracy. And we spend a lot of time in our union thinking and talking about that. But think about every public school as a place parents want to send their kids, educators want to work, students are engaged, curriculum is rich, where there's joy in teaching and learning. Why does that happen in some places and not in other places? This could be an opportunity to help create more and more of those places. And I think that most of us would agree that we're well beyond the so-called 3 R's. I actually think about the R's as not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but I think about them as relationships and resilience. But we have started thinking about things as the 4 C's, which frankly, I got years ago from Linda Darling Hammond. Communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Lots of people think about this in different kinds of ways, but in the world that is shaped, and this is going to sound different words, but similar, it's interesting, similar to how Leon talked to everyone, the world that's shaped by a vastly changing economy, by vastly changing circumstances, including deep polarization and deep frustration and fear of the other, and unfortunately, a whole bunch of racism added to that fear. Whether you call it Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, in ways that I would argue we haven't seen in this country since the 1920s and the 1930s. What do we do? How do we prepare students? So they need the knowledge, the skills, the dispositions that prepare them for post-secondary and lifelong learning. Everybody in this room can say that. Productive careers and democratic citizenship. We all have said that to each other or to groups like I'm doing to you how many times? But particularly important in that is the ability to think, and think critically, and think creatively, to solve problems, to apply knowledge. In some ways, my legal training helped me more as a social studies teacher than almost anything else, because that training was the muscle of applying knowledge. To inquire, to learn independently, to learn collaboratively, to use feedback, to effectively communicate, to build respectful relationships, and persevere in the face of obstacles. The real question is, how do we do all of that? Because that is as important as figuring out the trig problem. In fact, I would argue that those kind of skills, if you are not a math genius, can actually help you figure out the trig problem. So, even though not all meaningful learning does or should take place in schools, schools have to do their utmost to support the meaningful learning required for the development of these abilities. Again, you would say this to me: curriculum should be robust and culturally relevant. Instruction, I would argue, to do these kinds of things must employ projects-based learning and inquiry. And because of what we did in the reauthorization of ESEA, or No Child Left Behind, or what we now call ESSA, I do think the testing era can really be in the rear view mirror. I know most people don't believe that, but I think there is an opportunity to press at this. The post-recession disinvestment in K-12 is still there. Many of us are fighting to fund our future. It's sad that I still have to say things like kids need art and music, science and history, and I would argue sports and fitness and mindfulness. And there's a lot that we have to do to meet kids' needs. Indeed, I would argue that kids have to have a safe and welcoming environment first and foremost, and engagement is second. And for the record, let me just say, what gets taught should be determined by state standards, by district guidelines and curriculum, but how it gets taught is best determined by teachers using their professional expertise and judgment. And I would argue that the classroom teacher is the only person, or is the most important person, in regards to the knowledge she has of her students, the content she is teaching, and the context in which she is teaching. That is where the classroom is where a lot of the so-called magic of all of this happens. And so what we are doing in a national basis is we are trying to fight for the resources in the environment so people have and kids have a welcoming and safe environment. We're trying to fight for the funding that I just talked about, and New York is doing as good a job as most states, or frankly, a better job than most states in trying to fight for these resources. But we're also trying to fight for this freedom to teach so that people have the ability to meet the needs of kids. But the question that probably you're thinking about most, particularly given that so many of you have been so involved in the trenches for so long through all of these kind of top-down dictates that really focus simply on English tests and math tests and various other tests. How do we want students to demonstrate these knowledge and skills, this knowledge and skills? And how will we know? And what other measurements of achievement are possible? I don't have to convince anybody here that teaching and learning are complex practices. I do think we can evaluate learning by doing and using multiple measures. And we can capture the different aspects of education that's valued by families, by communities, by teachers, by having multiple measures. Because the goal of assessment should be to inform teaching and should be to assess mastery. And it should be to expand, not limit, education opportunities for students. And with the new ESSA, there is a way to move from teaching to the test to teaching students. Indeed, ESSA allowed authentic, instructionally relevant and validated performance-based assessments, like the New Hampshire Performance Assessment for Competency Education, which was the first innovative assessment pilot that was enabled or allowed under federal law. And I would argue that whether it is Trump who is reelected or one of the Democrats whose plans we have seen, there will be far more flexibility to do any of these things in the next administration. So I would just ask you, if you dream it, if you build it, it will be allowed. And there will be people like me and my union, the AFT, who will fight to enable it to happen. So what can we do? What do I see in terms of all of these kind of examples? Capstone projects, experiments, experiences to demonstrate mastery. If you don't remember anything else I say, think experiential learning and capstone projects. I have watched students in Florida build drones in robotics classes. I've watched kids in New York debate the Constitution and win competitions against lots of other kids across the country. And I've seen the muscle of this being used in New York in the New York Performance Standards Consortium. 38 schools, 30,000 students. Students must pass the English regents, but the rest of their readiness to graduate is shown through these performance-based assessment tasks. So how many of you know about the consortium schools here? Okay, I just want you to stand up for a second to show how few people know about these. Thank you for standing. The consortium schools develop their own performance assessments. They grow directly from the curriculum. They serve as an extension of the learning process. The assessments ask students to think deeply and show evidence. The focus on student performance measures, other than state tests, allow consortium teachers to emphasize critical thinking and problem solving, writing and discussion, open-ended questions, and student input. Students take a deep dive into their learning and work for months on major projects. They don't just study science. It's not just in the areas that I know. Science, they design, conduct, and reflect on an extended experiment. They don't just study history. They delve into it with historical documents, with artifacts, examining things from multiple perspectives, as Leon just said. Not simply from the perspective that any of our ideology may bring. They write analytical papers examining key questions, like the students I saw at Urban, who had written and then they were communicating that. And by the way, the teachers across the consortium are not independent actors. They have developed over the course of these last 20 years a common assessment rubric and review it on a regular basis. And the results? Consortium schools have higher 4- and 6-year graduation rates, lower dropout rates, higher college readiness rates, higher college going and completion rates than other New York City schools. Their graduation rates are roughly 50% greater for English language learners and students with disabilities, and the college enrollment rate for young men of color is more than double the national average. Now, am I saying that these schools and this approach is suitable for every student and all teachers? No way. And frankly, they had to work really hard to have gotten these waivers. They've had, in the last 25 years, many different waivers, 5 times. And the question I have for all of you is, isn't it time that we made the consortium's approach not a waiver, but a way? A formally accepted pathway to life beyond high school. And it frankly made me think about what Roger had said, I guess I should call him Regent Tillis, who said to me and challenged me when we first started thinking about this. But he and other regents have observed, how is it that passing the 5 regents exams, it can't just be that the 5 regents exams are the be-all and the end-all for the future of any student. And the late Regent Judith Johnson, who, by the way, taught with my mother. You know, we Rockland County girls stay together. Don't you want students to be able to answer the question, what do you know? As opposed to the question that we have actually done all the time, which is, do you know this? And so I think about not just what I saw 10 and 15 years ago or what I have seen in other places, but even Harvest High School in the last 2 years. Harvest Collegiate High School. Students write affidavits, they choose witnesses, they create exhibits tied to a mock trial actually held in a Brooklyn courthouse. You can see this in every single consortium school. It is the muscle of inquiry-based approach and a college readiness focus. But it's not the only way to assess powerful learning. Another place we see it is career tech ed. Not the old career tech ed programs of our grandparents, but in New York City, the graduation rate in schools running CTE programs, and I know a lot of the state runs its CTE programs through BOCES. So yes, I am pushing at that model too, is that the graduation rate in schools running CTE programs was 83% last year, beating New York City's public schools' all-time graduation rate of 76% from last year, which was pretty good for New York City. I'm not talking about the shop class. I'm not talking about a lesser alternative to college prep curriculum. But what I've seen throughout the country, including what I just talked about in Toledo and what we are doing in Peoria, is that the average high school graduation rate for students concentrating in CTE programs is 93%, compared to the average national freshman graduation rate of 80%. And what I've seen in these kind of modern day CTE programs, from the Harbor School in New York City to the Peoria schools that I'm about to talk about, is that CTE students are equally prepared to enter post-secondary education or go to the world of work. And for many students, being able to work part-time in their field while in college allows them to support themselves as they pursue college education. Peoria's Pathway to Prosperity program is a great example of this. We helped as the AFT fund this and fund the coordination of this. Through Pathways, just like Leon said, the Peoria mayor is a Republican. And I am, I'm sure you are not surprised, a Democrat. And so to see the two of us standing together, talking about this program, sends a really big message about the importance of public education in a bipartisan way. Hundreds of Peoria's public school students have had paid internships at local employers, gained valuable skills in high-demand jobs crucial to the Peoria region. Young women of color make up 44% of those in the program to date, and young men of color make up 25%. This is an alignment from Caterpillar to the community colleges to the healthcare industry in the town, and it is turned around and helped turn around the Peoria public schools. I want to lean into one other experience, which is, again, kind of, I am as fixated, not as articulate, but as fixated on democracy these days as Leon. Half the people in America who could vote don't vote. I spend a lot of time with kids. Kids are really concerned about the world we're leaving them in terms of climate, but the thing that they're most concerned about is whether they're going to get shot in school. Overwhelmingly, high school kids will tell you, not just in Parkland, which is one of our districts, one of my locals, and not just in Sandy Hook, which is another one, Newtown, of my locals. And frankly, when you are the union leader who has looked at a parent who has lost a child in the face, whether it is the parent of Scott Beagle, who happens to live on Long Island, or whether it is the parent of Daniel Barden, who happens to live in Newtown, you must do the things we need to do to keep our kids safe. But why does it take a shooting in a school for kids in high school to then say, oh yeah, I guess democracy matters. I guess elections matter. How do we create not just, say, democratic citizenship or participation in democracy? How do we actually make it that it matters? That students or people in this room or people in our community of educators don't think, oh, it's all rigged. My vote doesn't matter. And so I would actually suggest that we do more than what we're doing at the Albert Shanker Institute, where we just had a full-day democracy conference with Hillary Clinton and with several others, including Eric Holder and others. We're doing a whole lot on our Share My Lesson website. We're doing a lot with our national partners, including former Supreme Court justices and former First Ladies, to lift up the importance of civic education and action civics. But we need to do more. And I would argue to you, and again, I'm not saying this for NYSET or for AFT, but why don't we have a capstone experience? Why don't we have experiential learning, including things like what Urban Academy has done on election day or before election day, observing where machines are functioning and where they're not, where lines are short or long, analyzing that information, having that kind of experience, being able to create a link from voting to policy and why voting matters in a nonpartisan way. Civics and service learning is about engaging in a powerful way the process of politics and voting, the rule of law, the fundamentals of our democracy. It's not just an experience, although the experience is what actually helps, the engagement is what helps create the linkage about what matters. Our students need to be involved and engaged, and we need to make the issue of democratic citizenry as important in terms of graduation requirements as college readiness or as career readiness. So that brings me to the last issue, which is, how do we get there? There are many who will say that compared to other states, New York's Regents exams are amongst the most thoughtful ways, the better tests for determining whether students should get a diploma, and I agree with that. And in some ways, it is a powerful system. It's one where teachers have had a role in test design and scoring, one which has endured over time as the coin of the realm. But the problems of execution have been significant and ongoing. The issue about diagnostics, the issue about how broad they are or not. Frankly, the whole issue about preventing teachers from grading their own students' exams reflects a fundamental and detrimental distrust of teacher knowledge, teacher judgment, and teacher integrity. And there's a lot more that many of you can talk about with respect to this. Issues that I have not been involved with on a day-to-day basis, like Jolene and Michael Mulgrew and others for the last 10 years. But Anthony Alvarado taught me the same lesson as Liam Botstein just taught all of us, which is, and this was the former and long-term superintendent of District 2, when time is fixed in education, because of standardized test schedules, pacing guides, other strictures that don't allow for the human condition of learning or the human components of education. It's hard to get to equity, and it's hard to meet the needs of all kids. We know that more consistent compliance with Regents' test-taking accommodations for students with IEPs is crucial for equity. We know that that work needs to be built into a reimagination. With ELL students, I think schools should be encouraged to utilize the new 6-year graduation rate under ESSA to build strategic support for students who are English language or who are ELL or students with IEPs. I think there may be a real need or want to have subjects like US history over the course of 2 years instead of 1 year. So it's good that you're doing this work, that the timeline for the Blue Ribbon Commission has been extended. It's good that it will include teachers and unions. I'm glad that under Jolene's and Andy Pilata's direction, our affiliate NYSIT is doing the surveys and the work to gather real and valuable input from as many members as possible. Because if the ownership isn't there, I don't care what system one puts in place, it ain't gonna work. The ownership has to be there, the engagement has to be there, people feeling like they are building something together creates real ongoing responsibility and real ongoing commitment to an endeavor. Just remember what we all went through in terms of Common Core. So the bottom line for me is this. Over the course of the last 20 years, we know what powerful learning looks like, even though we don't know what is going to happen in 5 years and what kids are going to be faced with. We may not know the context. We may know that climate change, if you are in California right now, you're going to be thinking about climate change every single moment, particularly if you live or work near the Getty Museum. We don't know. We don't know what the next election brings. We don't know how the technology will change. We don't know what this trade war with China will bring. But we do know what powerful learning looks like. And we do know the importance of engagement and of meeting the social, emotional, and instructional needs of kids. And that when kids feel welcome and supported and engaged, they fly. So I believe that New York has a huge opportunity under Betty Rosa's, under Roger Tillis's leadership to expand our vision for students, to align what we do in schools with what kids need to know and be able to do to be successful adults, joyful, adults who think, adults who care, adults who have compassion, adults who believe in equity and justice. But it's not going to be one size fits all. There needs to be multiple pathways to demonstrate knowledge, skill, and competence. And I think, just like New York has led in so many different ways, I started by talking about what happened in the 20s and the 30s, and look how New York led in the 30s and the 40s. I think we can show every student that there's a pathway for them, one that encourages them to see it through to graduation. Getting more kids to a diploma that means something should be the test we set for ourselves. Thanks very much.